on there.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julie Ewington. I'm the head of Australian Art here at the Queensland Art Gallery Modern Art. It's my great pleasure to introduce Judy Watson, respected artist, now living again in Queensland, which is really great. And she will be assisted today as she talks about her installation In Our Skin by Shane, who, as you can see, is doing a wonderful job interpreting for us. Judy.
Thank you very much for coming today. Really great to see a whole lot of you here. And it was great to see everyone here at the opening last night too. Once again, thank you to the Queensland Art Gallery and the fabulous crew who helped me install and realise this work. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of reading first that talks about where this work originated from, and I also want to acknowledge, as well as everyone who's here, my family and traditional owners of this land we're sitting on or standing on. So, this book I'm trying to sell off at a really cheap price. No, you can buy it from the gallery, and it's called Frontier Justice by Tony Roberts, and I'm just going to read a few excerpts. So the first one is about something that happened on Lawn Hill Station, and a visitor to neighbouring Lilydale Station near present-day Riversley, which is where my grandmother was born, wrote dispassionately in her diary in 1883, "Mr. Watson has 40 pairs of black's ears." I must say that Mr. Watson is not related to me. "Black's ears nailed around the walls, collected during raiding parties after the loss of many cattle speared by the blacks." So I first read that in 1993 when I was doing a body of work with another artist, a Chilean artist, about the history of colonisation in our countries. And when I read that, I wrote in response, I listen and hear those words 100 years away. It goes down through blood and memory and soaks into the ground, because that was the way I felt. That could have been my family, you know, some of my relatives whose ears had been cut off and nailed to the homestead. So that is what this work is about here. And in 2007 I was doing a residency at South Australian School of Art, and with Waanyi, another artist, we got some dental alginate and actually did castings of people's ears, including my children, my mother, and other people, artists who were assisting me at the time. And once we had cast the dental alginate, we then made a little pool with clay and poured this wax, beeswax, etc. into it. And then the wax ears have then been sort of nailed into the wall. So that's where that came from, and that's why there's the 40 pairs of ears. Okay, another quote, if I can find it. In 2007, I was speaking with Ruby Saltmere, who was one of my relatives at my grandmother's funeral, and she told me about how my great-great-grandmother, her grandmother, escaped a massacre. And this is in Tony Roberts' book as well, so I'll read it from the book. Ruby told a story about how her Waanyi grandmother, Rosie, only narrowly escaped an early morning massacre by the native police on Lawn Hill Station. They were tired, they'd been on the run for weeks. The police caught up with them one morning when they were sound asleep, and she reckoned all she could hear were shots and people screaming and moaning. 13 or 14 at the time, Rosie and her girlfriend rolled under a windbreak of bushes from where they saw what followed. They wouldn't shoot the pregnant women, they bayoneted them and saved the bullets. The dogs and pregnant women and kids, they just whacked into them with the bayonet, so she had to live with that. I'd like to see you explaining that. Rosie, who's my great-great-grandmother and Ruby's grandmother, was cut on a shoulder when the police prodded the windbreak. And Ruby goes on to say, "God, I don't know how they missed her, they just cut her here." Who went on to describe how the girls fled and then hid underwater, put rocks on their tummies and get a straw to breathe out of. so the police wouldn't see them. They remained like this for 3 nights, they reckoned, and it rained too. Yes, they had it tough, eh? While gathering sugar bag or native honey, a day or so later, the young teenagers again came very close to being shot. The troopers were dog-tired. Rosie was up in the tree chopping out a sugar bag with a stone axe. The other girl heard the hobble chains and threw a stone up there to make her be quiet. And the troopers just rode by, just like from here to the bathroom over there, I suppose. And the horses spotted them, but the troopers were too tired. They were just like this, gestures in the saddle. And if they'd looked up and saw them, well, they would have had them both, eh? One of them was my granny. So the elements which are in this installation relate to that incident of my great-great-grandmother Rosie surviving the massacre. So this is my imagined windbreak, but it also alludes to the skirts that Aboriginal women from my area would wear, except that they would be hair and sort of sometimes rubbed with ochre. And old people from our area talked about how they could always tell you were from by touching your hair. So in Lawn Hill Gorge, there's a lot of lime in the water. It makes your hair very hard. And in other places, if it's fresh water and you go swimming there, your hair will be softer. Salt water, it would be different. That's what I imagine anyway, I'm not sure. Or whether it's to do with the curliness or straightness, but I've always been fascinated by that. And also very fascinated when I look at Aboriginal cultural material objects that are worn on the bodies, and I think about that DNA transference. I think about that idea that maybe hair from my great-grandmother, her mother, etc. might be twined within there, and it's like a transference for me. And I also talk about how in museums or cultural objects, I imagine them transferring almost spores between each other. For instance, in this site here, you can imagine this transmission, even within this exhibition, all these ideas imploding, floating up in the air, and then suddenly getting stuck or, you know, sort of moving across and cross-pollinating with each other. So this skirt form is talking about something that's very fragile, very ephemeral, and that whole idea how a windbreak, a very fragile form like this, could have saved my great-great-grandmother. These have been collected by Bruce McLean, the curator of Indigenous Art at the art gallery here, very kindly, because we're talking about what sorts of reeds would have been used by Aboriginal people, including my great-great-grandmother up in Waanyi country, and so looking at where they came from. They could have been water lily stems, or they could have been this particular reed here. And as you go further down the nodules, you'll be able to find the pieces which have the sort of the hollows, and you can breathe through. And a lot of the mob used to use them for duck hunting, apparently, take the little pieces. And I've seen, when I've been looking at objects from as close to my area as possible in overseas museums, small pieces of reed which have been cut and strung on necklaces, and they'll go a beautiful sort of golden brown over time. So that's related to this. These are some of the stations on the right-hand side that my grandmother, whose name is Grace Isaacson, and her mother, Mabel Daly, and her mother, Rosie, worked on. That's not all of them. There were many, many. And on the left are the rivers. And once again, not all of the rivers in this place, but just some of them. And the film that's being projected over here, that's my grandmother there, Grace Isaacson. She was Grace Camp. And the camp came from the Jim Camp, who was her father, who worked on Riversley Station, who she only remembers seeing once. And then she doesn't know if he went off to war or what. Apparently they've got property on Floraville Station, and my Uncle Ken always threatens to go up and introduce himself and say, I think we're related. So this is her talking. There are excerpts of an interview that I did with her in '99, sort of talking about her life. She didn't like talking about things from the past. She gets very upset in this film as well. And I've been chastised by some of my family for asking her questions. But I think it's important. I really like the way that the tendrils are very hair-like here. and they float off the wall and, you know, have a sort of a life of their own.
There is another element which we should discuss, which is rather a large one, which we've
Yeah, this one here is an interpretation in a way of what I've called the salt in the wound. So it's like this sort of the scar shape. It's a female form, and I have recreated a couple of times in installations. So it's never one thing or another. It's something that I sort of draw within a space to work within that space. So in this case, this is a shape that I thought worked for this area here, site-specific, and this is pooled salt on top. The first lot of pooled salt that I was given was a little bit more like caster sugar, and it really wasn't quite glistening enough, so we got another one from Bunnings, thank you. I mean, we had to pay for it, or the gallery had to pay for it, but that's then gone on with this much more crystallised sort of mounding form. And it's just that whole idea of, I guess, as artists, learning about your history, where you came from, why you're here, I suppose. You know, if my great-great-grandmother hadn't survived, I wouldn't be here, or our family wouldn't be here. And making work about that.
Judy, I wanted to ask you about one element that the folks sitting here can't see right now, and it's just around the corner. And I know that anything concerned with Grace is very dear to your heart. So I just want to mention that Grandmother's Song, a beautiful painting from 2007, is round the front, and you should look at it, but perhaps you might want to talk a little bit about that too.
Sure. It's a very, what I think of as a very female form, a vessel shape. Oh, and here's my mother. a vessel shape. And called Grandmother's Song, and it's got a form of a Bailar Shell, which I often use in reference to bailing out water. It's once again a very female shape and form. Bailar shells were traded from the Gulf of Carpentaria, even possibly from some of the islands, and all the way down, and they've been found as far down as New South Wales, used for ornaments and also like spear throwers, etc., etc. And I've also seen many, many Bailar shells in inland areas where there's freshwater soaks or water holes which are dug out of the ground, and the Bailar shell will be there as a receptacle or a cup, you know, for drinking. So that sort of form is in there, and it's there's also some little seed pods and a form from some of the plants that you find in northwestern Queensland and across into the Northern Territory. Any questions?
That's right. This is the part where I can dance amongst you and bring the microphone to folk who'd like to ask questions or make comments. So who's going to... Does anyone want to...
Oh, and I should just mention the stones, obviously, the reference to the weighting down of the young girls to hold themselves underwater.
Okay, in the front.
I think everybody would recognise the name of Sir David Attenborough, and I'll never forget one of his TV shows when he said that Lawn Hill Creek was his favourite place on the whole earth.
Yes. Well, he's been at Riverslea and Lawn Hill when we've been out there as well, and I'd have to agree with him. It is a very, very beautiful area. All of those rivers around there and that water, it's known as dinosaur water. It's subterranean water which comes up through fissures in the rock and has beautiful springs. It's amazing country, so I would recommend it as a travel destination for anybody who wants to see a very, very remarkable place. So my grandmother was born on Riverslea Station, that's Grace Isaacson, and they used to travel to Lilydale Springs and that area, and also Lawn Hill was where Rosie, my great-great-grandmother, was. So all of that area is very connected to us, and in fact my sisters and I want to do a walk because from Riverslea Station to Thorntonia, because when my grandmother was about 5 or 6 years old, she was taken with her mother, Mabel Daly, and baby brother Paddy and little sister Daisy, or baby sister Daisy, and they went running away in the middle of the night. My grandmother says it was a couple of things. They were escaping from the police. She called them the Burketown police, who used to take the half-caste kids away, as she put it. Don't use that term now, but that's what was used. And they would be hidden. And she remembers that the manager's wife, Mrs. Donaldson on Riversley, used to alert the women, the mothers, to hide their children. But so that happened on a number of occasions, but they were also escaping a case of domestic abuse on Riversley as well. So they ran away middle of the night. My grandmother talks about how she was terrified. They were all terrified, and they were crossing creeks and rivers. And so that's some of these ones here. And I just imagine that journey. And they went as far as Thorntonia station. Then my grandmother was put onto a coach and sent to Moorstone because Mrs. Donaldson had been told that a little girl was wanted to work on Moorstone station, another station. So my grandmother thinks she might have been 5 or 6 and she started working on Moorstone station.
Judy, this is an extraordinary story of resilience.
Yes.
And cunning and daring.
Yes.
It's an amazing thing to think of young kids, being as sharp and as courageous as that.
In the film, when you get to hear it, my grandmother talks about how her mother, Mabel Daly, used to catch fish in the rivers, and she talked about catching one which was so big, a barramundi, that she had to carry it on her shoulder. A massive one must have hung all the way down there. But she also said on this trip and subsequent fishing that her mother, Mabel Daly, used to give us the flesh off the backbone. She gave us the best of what she had. So that's why I use that symbol of the backbone a lot.
Judy, I wanted to mention too, I don't want to take up too much time, but on that walk, my grandmother was really quite young when she had my mother. It was her first child.
She was 12 years old.
And so, she was quite young when she was daring enough to go away. And what happened was my mother carried a little bit of flour, or she might have carried a little billy can of water. Little Paddy carried flour, and baby Daisy, of course, was in a Coolaman. So, you can imagine these little children. And my mother forever was very, very frightened of the sound of the leaves in the night. Which tree was that, Judy?
Casuarina.
The casuarina tree. It sort of is like a really strange, eerie noise when the wind gets in it at night. I just wanted to add that.
But you used to go out with old mum too, didn't you? As you called Mabel Daly on Maydown Station.
On Maydown Station was a very little girl, so they taught me a little bit of, sort of different plants to dig for the yams and a lot of things like that. And there's one wonderful story where my grandma, Mabel, she had always had her hunting dogs with her.
It's in the film actually, so you can listen to my grandmother talking about it.
And so, yes, what happened was my grandmother was up a tree looking for honey, I believe, and the dogs chased a goanna and it raced up the tree and straight up her legs.
Speaking of honey too, there was something that isn't in this show, which I was saying to Julie, I'd like to have some wild honey in here too. And she said, well, I don't know about that.
The native bees don't hurt.
Yeah. So because my grandmother, Grace, was really fantastic at collecting sugarbag, always knowing where it was, and apparently she said she learned from her mother, and she'd say, her mother Mabel, she said she'd be fooling around under the tree and picking up little bits of wax and things like that and just looking for the bees and following the bees, and then she'd know where they were coming from.
Something else, Judy, the sand stories, which was, I think, all over Australia. The women would sit down on the ground and smooth the sand, and then as they'd start a story, they'd point and they'd go a bit further, and that would be another little point in the story, something special that they used to tell you. So it used to spiral out until the story finished. Thanks, Julie.
It's clear that this is it's the wrong metaphor. I was going to say the tip of the iceberg. No, this is just a small portion of the incredible stories, perhaps, that were in the sand, actually, Joyce. This is just a sense of what it took to come through the period of colonial life. to survive. And
So that's where I recommend this book again. And I don't get anything from it, so no, I do. I get lots of inspiration. So Frontier Justice, Tony Roberts, there's many other books out there, but I think for people living here, it's really important that you should read this history.
Judy's made us aware of this book, so it's in the resource area that we've put down here in the River Room, and Peter Byers has kindly agreed to stock it in the gallery store. Judy, it's been incredibly generous, and thank you very much. Thank you for the work.
Thank you, Julie.
And thank you everybody for coming today. Please help me in thanking Judy for her presentation.